42,000 years ago, somewhere in what's now northern Spain. A Neanderthal man crouches by a fire that's dying faster than he can feed it. His joints ache from a lifetime of close-range hunting, the kind that leaves broken ribs and healed-over fractures on almost every adult skeleton we've ever dug up. 50 miles away, in a limestone cave, a different kind of human is carving a bird bone into a flute. Not a warmer coat, not a sharper spear, not a bigger brain. We're talking about the last few thousand years two entire species of human shared this planet, and only one of them walked away. Here's the thing nobody tells you. Neanderthals weren't losers. They outsurvived us in Europe for over 300,000 years, through ice ages that would have flattened most modern cities. The idea that they were a failed draft of humanity is one of the great scientific misreadings of the last century, and we're only now cleaning it up. To understand what actually happened, you have to go back past culture, past tools, past anything you'd recognize as civilization, to a much older, dumber question. Who gets to eat and who gets to breed? That's it. That's the whole game evolution plays. The oldest solid evidence we have of Homo sapiens in Europe comes from Bacho Kiro Cave in Bulgaria, dated to around 45,000 years ago. Modern human teeth and bone fragments sitting in the same sediment layers as Neanderthal tools. Not a takeover, an overlap. Two species, same cave system, taking turns. Somewhere in there, for tens of thousands of years, the biggest competitive advantage on Earth was just showing up to the berry bush first. And the wildest part is none of this was planned. Interbreeding wasn't a strategy. It was two populations running into each other in river valleys, sharing space, and doing what living things do. Your body wasn't confused about a Neanderthal standing across the clearing. It was like, oh, hello, I've been waiting for you. We know this because somewhere between 1% and 4% of the DNA in most non-African people alive today is Neanderthal. You are, statistically, walking evidence of that meeting. Now walk the timeline. Grotta del Cavallo in southern Italy, modern human baby teeth dated to roughly 45,000 years ago, some of the earliest Homo sapiens remains in Europe. Vindija Cave in Croatia, Neanderthal bones that gave scientists the first working draft of the Neanderthal genome in 2010. Shanidar Cave in Iraq, a Neanderthal skeleton buried with flower pollen in the soil around it. The individual, nicknamed Shanidar I, had a withered arm and was blind in one eye, and still lived for years, which means someone was feeding him. And then, around 40,000 years ago, the last confirmed Neanderthal sites, places like Goram's Cave in Gibraltar, go quiet. Does the absence of newer evidence mean they vanished overnight? Or does it just mean we haven't found the last ones yet? For over a century, the story got told wrong on purpose. In 1856, when the first Neanderthal skeleton was found in Germany's Neander Valley, the pathologist Rudolf Virchow looked at the bowed leg bones and the heavy brow and declared it wasn't a new kind of human at all, just a modern man deformed by disease, maybe rickets, maybe arthritis. He was dismissed by some, believed by others, and the brutish caveman myth calcified around his mistake for decades. Then genetics showed up. Full Neanderthal genomes, sequenced brow to bone, revealed a species with complex behavior, symbolic thought, and a genetic legacy still living in your cells. Virchow wasn't right that it was disease. But the deeper irony is this. Whoever first assumed these were just broken humans wasn't exaggerating the humanity. If anything, they were underselling it. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. Long before anyone called it art or religion, symbolic behavior was sacred, not casual. Red ochre, the same iron-rich pigment found smeared in burial sites across Neanderthal and early human graves alike, wasn't cosmetic. It was ritual. Bodies were painted before they were buried. Objects were placed with the dead. Compare that to today, where the same pigment chemistry shows up in a drugstore aisle as blush and lipstick, grabbed on a Tuesday without a second thought. What was once a rite performed over a body is now a $50 pallet on a bathroom shelf. And this wasn't uniquely human behavior, either. That's the theory a growing number of researchers, including primatologists studying grief responses in elephants and corvids, keep circling back to. Elephants linger over the bones of their dead. Crows have been documented gathering around a dead crow in ways some researchers describe as investigatory, almost funeral-like. If elephants are holding vigils and crows are holding what looks suspiciously like a wake, then burying the dead with flowers wasn't a uniquely human leap forward. It might be a much older biological instinct that several species, including at least 2 kinds of human, all stumbled into separately. Because here's what that ritual behavior actually did for the group. It built trust. A community that buries its dead, that paints bodies, that shares medicine with the sick and injured, is a community that has decided its members are worth investing in even when they can't hunt anymore. That's not decoration. That's social infrastructure, the emotional glue that lets a group of exhausted, vulnerable primates trust each other enough to survive a bad winter together. Which makes what happened later so much worse. For most of human history, the image of the brutish Neanderthal stayed a scientific curiosity. Then, in the late 19th and early 20th century, as European colonialism and eugenics movements went looking for scientific cover, that image got weaponized, used in textbooks and popular science to construct racial hierarchies, to draw a straight line from primitive to civilized that conveniently placed certain groups of living people closer to the caveman end. A Neanderthal mother burying her child with flowers 50,000 years ago, and a 20th century eugenicist citing a caveman's skull to justify a racial hierarchy. Both looked at the same bones. They had almost nothing else in common. So what actually happened to them? Honestly, we don't fully know, and we may never know for certain. Climate swings hit small, spread-out Neanderthal populations harder than the more networked groups of Homo sapiens. Interbreeding absorbed some of them into our gene pool rather than erasing them. Competition for the same shrinking resources probably didn't help. It wasn't one dramatic extinction event. It looks more like a slow demographic squeeze over thousands of years across a shifting map, and maybe the instinct to see that as failure says more about us than about them. Surviving 300,000 years, adapting tools, medicine, and burial rites to an ice age, and then quietly folding into a related population instead of disappearing, that's not weakness. That's not addiction to a losing strategy. That's intelligence. Because in the end, this is bigger than one species. A Neanderthal in Shanidar laying flowers on a grave, and an early Homo sapiens artist in Chauvet painting horses by torchlight, and a Denisovan mother in a Siberian cave whose finger bone is the only trace we have of her entire lineage, and a 19th century scientist misreading a skull to serve an ugly agenda, and a modern geneticist quietly correcting the record one genome at a time. They're all part of the same unbroken thread of creatures trying to make sense of death, of kinship, of who belongs. You carry a piece of that story in your own DNA right now, whether you've ever thought about it or not. They never really left you.